He pulled him over like it was just another routine stop. The flashing lights, the loudspeaker command, the harsh bark of an order. "Driver, keep your hands where I can see them." A firm voice cut through the calm suburban afternoon. But what the officer didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that this stop would haunt him for years to come. Before we dive deeper into this unbelievable story, make sure to subscribe to the channel. If you enjoy true stories with shocking twists and powerful messages, you're in the right place. Now, let's uncover the truth behind this tense confrontation, and how a moment of arrogance would leave one man speechless. It started like this. Officer Bradley Moore had been with the force for over 15 years. Known for his sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude, he prided himself on always being in control. That day, while patrolling a quiet neighborhood just outside of Baltimore, he spotted a black luxury sedan rolling slowly through a stop sign. Nothing too serious, but enough for a traffic stop. Moore flicked on his lights, expecting the usual routine: license, registration, maybe a ticket, then back on his route. The driver pulled over without hesitation. Calm. Composed. Maybe too composed for Officer Moore's taste. Inside sat an elderly man. Dark suit, neatly pressed. Silver hair, eyes hidden behind a pair of modest sunglasses. He looked like he belonged in a courtroom, not behind the wheel in a suburban street. Moore stepped out of his cruiser and approached the vehicle. "License and registration," he said, sharply. The man responded with a nod, reached into the glove compartment, and handed over both documents. His hands moved slowly, deliberately, no sudden gestures. Moore glanced over the ID: James A. Walker. Age, 72. Address, Washington, D.C. "Where you headed today, Mr. Walker?" Moore asked. "Home," came the calm reply. "Just finished a meeting." Moore narrowed his eyes. Something about the man's tone rubbed him the wrong way. Too calm. Too collected. Like he wasn't intimidated. Like he didn't recognize Moore's authority. Moore returned to his cruiser to run the plates. The car came back clean. So did the license. No outstanding warrants. No record. Nothing to hold him on, just a minor traffic violation. But as he walked back to the sedan, Moore noticed something that made him pause. A badge. Tucked just inside the man's jacket pocket, barely visible, but clearly there. "Step out of the vehicle," Moore ordered. Walker raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem, officer?" Moore's jaw tightened. "I said step out of the vehicle." Walker exhaled slowly, then opened the door and stood. He was tall, taller than Moore expected, and though his age showed in his face, he stood with the posture of someone who had spent years in authority. Moore gestured toward the badge. "What's that? Trying to play dress-up today?" Walker didn't react. He simply reached into his jacket and pulled out the badge, holding it in full view. "James Walker," he said. "Federal Bureau of Investigation. Retired." Moore blinked, then laughed. A short, sharp, disrespectful laugh. "Come on, man," he scoffed. "You seriously expect me to believe that? Anyone can buy a replica badge online. What is this, some kind of prank?" Walker said nothing. He didn't argue. Didn't explain. He simply stared at Moore, the same calm expression on his face. And that's when Moore made his biggest mistake. He grabbed the badge from Walker's hand and turned it over, inspecting it like a cheap prop. "This is a joke," he muttered. "You trying to impersonate a federal agent? That's a felony, you know." Still, Walker remained silent. Until he pulled out one more item from his coat, a leather folder with a worn, gold-embossed seal. Inside, the unmistakable credentials of a man who had spent 40 years in federal service. Clearance level high enough to access files Moore had never even heard of. Moore's eyes scanned the document. Then again. Then a third time. Silence. Suddenly, the air felt different. Walker finally spoke. "I may be retired, Officer Moore, but that doesn't mean I'm powerless. In fact, I was just at headquarters this morning. Met with a few old friends in internal affairs." Moore's face turned pale. His hands twitched slightly as he handed the credentials back. "Look, I didn't mean any disrespect." Walker slid the documents back into his coat. "Of course not. You were just doing your job, right?" But Moore knew. Deep down, he knew he'd crossed a line. The stop ended without further incident. No ticket. No warning. Just a silent ride back to his patrol car, mind racing with possibilities. Who was that man? Why had his name sounded familiar? That night, Moore did some digging. And what he found made his stomach turn. James Walker wasn't just a retired agent. He was legendary within the Bureau. Known for taking down high-profile corruption rings, dismantling organized crime from the inside, and even serving as a senior advisor on Homeland Security. His career was the stuff of documentaries, the kind young recruits watched during training. And Moore had laughed in his face. But it didn't end there. 2 days later, Moore was called into the precinct captain's office. Inside sat a man in a dark suit, younger than Walker, but carrying the same air of federal authority. "We've received a formal complaint," the man said. "Filed directly through the Bureau." Moore's heart sank. "About what?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Conduct unbecoming. Disrespect during a routine traffic stop. Mishandling of federal identification. Possible profiling." Moore tried to explain. That he hadn't known. That Walker hadn't presented himself properly. That it was all a misunderstanding. But the agent didn't budge. "Agent Walker doesn't file complaints lightly," he said. "And when he does, people listen." What Moore didn't realize was that Walker hadn't intended to file anything at first. He had walked away that day willing to let the disrespect slide, until he overheard Moore's voice on a bodycam recording, mocking him to dispatch. Calling him a washed-up old clown with a toy badge. That was the final straw. The video was reviewed. Moore was put on administrative leave pending investigation. His reputation? Tarnished overnight. And Walker? He never raised his voice. Never retaliated. He let the system he had helped build do the work for him. The news spread faster than Moore could contain it. Within hours, whispers were echoing through the precinct, not just about the body cam footage, but about who the man in the black sedan truly was. Officers began sharing stories. Some remembered hearing his name in old bureau briefings. Others swore they had read about him in internal case studies. His legacy, it seemed, hadn't faded with retirement, it had only grown more untouchable. Moore sat alone in the break room, staring into a cup of cold coffee, his hands trembling ever so slightly. He kept replaying the moment over and over, the smug confidence, the quiet power in Walker's voice, the sheer authority in his presence. How could he have missed the signs? But things were only getting started. The Internal Affairs Department didn't waste time. Within 3 days, Moore was summoned again, this time to face a formal disciplinary hearing. 3 officers, 2 representatives from the city's Civilian Review Board, and 1 very familiar face from the FBI's Ethics Division. A hearing Moore thought would be routine turned into something entirely different. "Officer Moore," began the chairwoman of the review board, "before we begin, I want you to understand the gravity of the complaint brought against you. This is not simply about a traffic stop. This is about behavior. About judgment. And about respect for federal authority." Moore nodded stiffly. "Understood." She leaned forward. Do you know the full extent of Mr. Walker's service? Moore opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. No, he didn't. Not really. The FBI liaison answered for him. Agent James Walker was one of the Bureau's most decorated field operatives. 37 years in active service. 6 undercover assignments, 2 of which lasted longer than 3 years. He was nearly killed in the line of duty. Twice. Received the FBI Medal for Meritorious Achievement. Advised presidents. Investigated senior government officials. He wasn't just an agent, Officer Moore, he was the gold standard. Moore's face turned pale again. It felt like the floor beneath him was slowly giving way. But that's not why you're here, the liaison continued. You're here because when he showed you the badge, you laughed. You mocked him. You dismissed him as a fraud. And when given a second chance to act with dignity, you insulted him over the radio. The silence in the room was suffocating. Moore tried to compose himself. I didn't know. He didn't identify himself clearly. I thought it was fake. No, the chairwoman interrupted. You assumed it was fake. And that assumption speaks volumes. That was the moment Moore realized, this wasn't about Walker pressing charges. This was about something deeper. About the message his actions had sent, and the ripple effect that message would cause. Outside the precinct, the story was beginning to attract attention. The footage, leaked anonymously, began circulating on social media. It spread like wildfire. People were outraged. Some recognized Walker immediately and couldn't believe how he'd been treated. Others didn't care who he was, they were furious that an elderly man, respectful and composed, had been humiliated by a uniformed officer. The backlash was swift. Civil rights groups began demanding accountability. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines like, "Veteran FBI agent mistaken for imposter by local cop." Body cam footage reveals shocking disrespect toward retired federal hero. Even members of Congress chimed in, calling for stronger training on protocol and respect for identification. Moore tried to stay off the internet. But it was impossible to ignore. His family stopped answering phone calls. His wife left their home to stay with her sister, citing too much pressure. His teenage son, once proud to say his dad was a cop, now refused to speak to him. But while Moore's life unraveled, Walker remained silent. He gave no interviews. Released no statements. He simply watched, with the same composure he had shown on that quiet street corner. Only one person got to speak with him directly in the days that followed, a young journalist named Elena Ruiz. Known for her investigative pieces on federal justice and police misconduct, Elena had been chasing a story like this for years. Walker agreed to one meeting. No cameras. No recordings. The cafe was nearly empty when Elena arrived. Walker was already seated, sipping black coffee, reading the newspaper like it was just another Tuesday. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Elena said, sliding into the seat across from him. Walker nodded. "I don't usually talk to reporters. But something about your message intrigued me." Elena smiled politely. "You said nothing publicly after the incident. Why now?" Walker folded the newspaper carefully and placed it on the table. "Because I've seen this happen before. Young officers with too much pride, not enough wisdom. And departments that let it slide, until someone gets hurt. I didn't file a complaint to ruin a man's life. I did it to protect others from making the same mistake." Elena leaned forward. "Do you think Moore should lose his badge?" Walker paused. "That's not my decision. But let me tell you a story." And with that, he told her about a case from 1989. About a rookie federal agent who nearly cost a man his life because he acted on instinct instead of fact. That agent was Walker himself. And the guilt of that mistake followed him for years. "I learned from it," he said quietly. "The hard way. And I swore I'd never let arrogance replace discipline again." Elena nodded slowly. "And more?" "He has a choice now," Walker replied. "Either he learns, or he disappears into his own shadow." The article that followed became a national headline. Not because Walker blamed the officer, but because he reminded everyone that authority without humility is a dangerous thing. Back in Baltimore, Moore's review board reached its decision. He would be suspended without pay for 60 days. Required to complete mandatory federal protocol training. And placed under probation for 1 year. To some, it felt too lenient. To Moore, it was a crushing blow. The uniform no longer carried the same weight. When he returned to duty, things had changed. Fellow officers kept their distance. The community he once patrolled with confidence now looked at him with skepticism, even fear. And worst of all, he couldn't shake the feeling that every interaction was being watched, by the public, by his superiors, by his own conscience. And yet, amid all of it, one thing lingered most: the image of Walker standing calmly beside his car, badge in hand, eyes full of a quiet strength Moore had never known, and would likely never forget. Months passed. The incident faded from national headlines, but it never really disappeared. In the background, forums, watchdog groups, and federal training programs began referencing it as a case study. The body cam footage, though no longer viral, lived on in presentations and seminars. In police academies across the country, instructors would pause the clip at just the right moment, when Officer Moore laughed, and ask, "What went wrong here?" For Moore, the consequences continued long after his suspension ended. He tried to return to his old routine, to treat the job like before. But nothing felt the same. Community members who used to wave now crossed the street. Officers who once joked with him now only offered tight nods. The badge he wore, once a symbol of pride, had become a daily reminder of his mistake. Even his home life was different. His marriage, though intact, was strained. His son, now quiet and withdrawn, seemed to view him not as a hero, but as a cautionary tale. One evening, after another long shift, Moore sat alone on his porch. The sun was setting, casting a deep orange light across the street. He held a worn folder in his hands, a printed copy of the article written by Elena Ruiz. He'd read it dozens of times, always stopping at one particular line. Authority means nothing without discipline. And discipline begins with respect. He didn't cry. Not anymore. But something inside him shifted every time he read those words. In the months following the incident, Walker had resumed his quiet life. Retired, but not inactive. He now lectured occasionally at federal seminars and wrote advisory reports on ethical conduct and interagency training. He never mentioned Moore by name. Never used the footage to elevate himself. He simply used the experience to teach. It wasn't revenge. It was responsibility. And maybe, just maybe, that's why the story stayed alive, because it wasn't about humiliation or punishment. It was about accountability. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. Moore received a letter. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a short note. Respect is earned every day, not just worn on a uniform. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after. J.W. Moore stared at the initials for a long time. He didn't know how Walker got his address. He didn't ask. All he knew was that this quiet, dignified gesture, felt heavier than any punishment ever could. It was a chance. Not for redemption, maybe, but for growth. That week, Moore requested a transfer. Not to escape, but to start over. He volunteered for community outreach programs, began participating in conflict de-escalation workshops, and even took night classes on bias and procedural justice. He no longer carried himself like a man who knew everything. He listened more. Spoke less. Slowly, his actions began to shift perceptions. 1 year after the original incident, something remarkable occurred. The same journalist, Elena Ruiz, published a follow-up piece. This time titled, "The Officer Who Learned, 1 Year After the Badge Incident, A Story of Change." In it, she described Moore's journey, not as a redemption arc, but as a case of accountability, humility, and evolution. The article didn't absolve him. But it showed he had chosen to face his mistake head-on. The piece ended with a quote from Walker. "Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's choosing to believe that change is possible." The reaction was mixed. Some believed Moore deserved no second chance. Others found hope in his transformation. But what mattered most wasn't public opinion, it was that the story continued to echo in the right places: training rooms, roll calls, classrooms. Because that's what stories like this are for. To remind us that authority isn't granted by a badge, but earned through actions. That respect isn't something demanded, it's something cultivated, moment by moment. And that every decision, every word, every assumption, has weight. Officer Moore never became a captain. Never won any awards. But in the years that followed, he mentored younger officers, many of whom had never heard of James Walker. And when they asked him why he spent so much time teaching about restraint, listening, and respect, he would only say, "I made a mistake once, and a man chose to teach me instead of destroy me." That's not weakness. That's leadership. So what can we take from all this? Power is temporary. Respect is lasting. And sometimes, the most powerful statement we can make is not to shout, but to remain calm, stand firm, and let our character speak for us. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful story. If you found meaning in this, help us share it. Like the video, leave a comment below about what you think makes someone truly worthy of respect, and most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more true stories with powerful lessons and unforgettable twists. We tell the stories that deserve to be heard, and you're part of that mission. Until next time, stay sharp, stay respectful, and never underestimate the quiet strength of someone who's seen more than they speak.